This episode is another Away episode. In our first Away episode, released on the 12th of March, we heard from Effie from Mum's Mysteries and Murder about Scottish murderer Jason Downey, who killed 16-year-old Chantel Rowe, her dad Andrew and mum Rose at their home near Adelaide in Australia. In this episode, we're going to hear from John Dobson from the Persons Unknown podcast, who's going to tell us about a murder that took place in the northeast of England. So hi John, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me on.
Before we begin today's story, which is an Away story, could you tell us a wee bit about yourself and your podcast?
Yeah, so my name's John. I live in Cardiff in Wales. So my podcast is called Persons Unknown. It deals exclusively with unsolved cases, and I cover them from all over the world, basically. Unsolved murders or missing persons cases, basically. So I think the episode that came out on Monday was the 70th episode I've done. So most of them are about 50 minutes or so in length. Some of them are more than that. Some of them are a little bit shorter. Yeah, but it's heavy on the research and it's narrative in style. I just go through the investigation basically from the first to now.
Why did you start your podcast?
That's a really good question. I think during lockdown, I was on furlough and I was been listening to true crime podcasts for a while, and I just thought, I wonder if there are any unsolved. I was always interested in the unsolved aspect of the true crime kind of world, and I thought, I wonder if there are any unsolved cases near where I live in Cardiff. And I just had a Google and found there was one literally a stone throw from where my kids go to school back from the 50s. And at the time, my grandfather was a detective in the Cardiff City Police, so he didn't work murders, he worked vice. But when I asked my dad about it, he remembered my grandpa as I called him, talking about it. And where this lady, Jean, her name was, where the body was found, my dad remembers kind of hearing stories about that area and kind of hearing stories about the murder when he was growing up. So, and it remains unsolved to this day. So that was what started me off. And I researched it because there was nothing written really. There's one article or two from the modern day, but I just got hold of the archives, got a subscription and just started reading through old newspaper reports basically. So that's how I started. And I enjoy doing it. And like I said, I've branched off to doing unsolved cases from all over the world, really. South Korea, Australia, USA, Canada, New Zealand, Africa, Europe, all over the place. And I tend to do cases that people haven't heard of, that haven't been covered before. Not always, but quite often.
Yeah, and like you said, it's very research heavy. Listening to your podcast, you do a lot of research. It must take you quite a while. It does,
yeah, it can be. I mean, I think it's quite often 60 sources that I'm reading every time. So it's every other week, the podcast. So, but I enjoy, that's my favorite part, is digging into the research and finding things out. And I've covered cases in America, and someone's contacted me who knew the family of this person that's gone missing and said, you found out things that no one else had found out before. All this information is public, but it's just buried in archives. So it's nothing, there's no magic about it. It's just reading, basically, doing lots and lots of reading. That's what in my day job, my normal day job is I work in a library. So I like reading a lot. So it comes naturally. Yeah.
Well, like I said, John, it's an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I've been really looking forward to doing this with you for a while.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
So, like I said, today's episode is an Away episode, all about the murder of 44-year-old Anne Heron at her home in Darlington, in the northeast of England in August 1990. But before we hear from John about Anne's murder, let's first hear a bit about Anne's early life in Scotland before Anne's marriage broke down and she moved to England and married her second husband, Peter Heron. Here's Anne's son, Ralph, who kindly agreed to speak with me for this episode.
My mum was, I think, 16, 17. She had just left school and she worked in Beattie's Biscuit Factory in Drumchapel in Glasgow with her sister, who was my Aunt Marie. And my dad worked at a lab which was very close to the biscuit factory. And apparently everybody used to go outside at lunchtime and just sort of mingle about. So my dad was outside the lab mingling about. My mum and her sister came out of the biscuit factory. And that was it. They met, started talking, and the rest is history, as they say. So when my mum married my dad, we lived in Glasgow. And my mum had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. So there was 6 of them, and the family lived in Drumchapel in Glasgow, and my dad's side of the family lived in Knightswood, which is also in Glasgow as well.
She was born in 1946. I was born in 64, so she was 18 when she had me. So I did know her as a youngster. My first sort of recollection of anything really was my mum's 21st birthday party, when her mum and dad came to the house to celebrate her birthday and were bringing a steak pie and dropped it in the middle of the road, and every dog in Drumchapel in Glasgow had steak pie for the rest of the day. So that's probably my earliest recollection. I had a young brother, Michael, who was 10 years younger than me. My young sister, Anne-Marie, was a year younger than me. So we did lots together, went on lots of family holidays. Didn't go abroad at that time. Couldn't afford to go abroad. My mum was stayed at home and looked after the kids when my dad was in the police in Glasgow.
Most of my mum's family moved to Canada. So they're all over in Canada and have been for a number of years. Before 1990, they were all living over there. And my mum had gone across to visit them with my young brother when he was 5 or 6 years of age as well. So that's where most of them are.
She loved holidays, she loved socialising, music was a huge thing. I still remember songs that, she used to walk about the house singing. But as a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old, she went to see Cliff Richard in concert, so that was her big person round about then. But it was all of the sort of late 50s, early 60s music, that kind of stuff. Just brings back good memories when I hear it. Yeah, so we lived in Glasgow, in Drumchapel, and then we moved to Kelvindale, and then my mum and dad were nearly split up, but we moved to Rothesay for them to try and save the marriage. So we lived in Butte for a little while.
So we all moved in as a family. I went to Rothesay. My sister and I went to Rothesay Academy. We stayed down there for about, I think I'd finished my O-levels down there. And I left school, and it was just around about that point.
They eventually split up in Butte, and we came back to Glasgow. And at that point, my mum moved down to Darlington. So that would have been 1980 or so when she moved down there.
Peter Heron had come from Darlington to Rothesay to play golf, and my mum worked in the Brandane pub at that point, and they had all gone in, and that's where my mum met Peter Heron, and clearly things developed from that point, but we were unaware of that at that time.
Initially, when she moved in, I was an angry teenager. I was 16 years of age. I just wanted, I just wanted her to come back, didn't want her to go. So initially I was against it, but I then started to realise, and I think it was as I started to get a little bit older and realised that she was happy after she had moved south of the border, then I accepted that because she was happy. She was going on holidays. She was, she was doing all right. She loved to travel. One of the favourite places that she went to Israel and went to see Bethlehem and do all of that kind of stuff. So that was something that she loved. She loved going to Spain. She liked hot places, going to hot places and going on holiday. Animals. She loved animals. The house that she had in Darlington had quite a bit of land round about it, and there was stables at the back. And so the guy that she subsequently married when she went down to Darlington, Peter Heron, it was his house. He had a couple of daughters and they had a horse which was out the back. She then decided to put some lambs in her back garden, or sheep in her back garden. So one year that I went down to see her, walked into the living room and there's a lamb lying in front of the coal fire, and she's feeding it with a bottle and things, so trying to keep it alive. So that's the kind of person she was. I've got 3 kids, and my mum met 2 of them. So my oldest son was born in 1986. My youngest son was born in 1989. My daughter was born a month after my mum was killed in 1990. So mum never got a chance to meet her. But the boys I took down to Darlington to see my mum. And I think I was looking at it this morning. I think it must have been 1990, earlier in 1990, because we went to the Gateshead. It was a City of Culture or something like that. And Gateshead Garden Festival, I think, 1990, early 1990. So May, June 1990, we came down. I brought the boys down there, and I've still got the old VHS video of them running about in our front garden, and also going to places like that garden festival, Flamingo Land. I think we went to another theme park fairly close to Darlington as well. So yeah, lots of good memories. So initially she was happy, and there were, I guess, with everybody's life, you've got your ups and your downs. So there were things that made her unhappy, and towards the end, there are there are stories that she wanted to move back to Glasgow. I think she had phoned my dad and said to my dad that she wanted to move back to Glasgow, not to go back to him, I don't think, in any shape or form. But there was that suggestion, although that was, I don't know for a fact if that was the case or what the underlying issues were at the end.
If she was planning on moving back, I mean, my daughter was just due to be, my daughter was born on the 8th of September, 1990, so it was less than a month later. Oh, sorry, just over a month later. And my mum on the day she was killed had bought a card from my daughter. And I already had 2 boys as well, so maybe it was the pool of the grandkids, I don't know.
We'll hear from Ralph again later in the episode, but now let's hear John tell us about Anne Heron's murder.
Friday, August 3rd, 1990 was the hottest day of the year, and temperatures hovered at around 34 degrees or 93 Fahrenheit. 44-year-old Anne Heron spent the morning shopping in Darlington, a town with a population of approximately 100,000 in County Durham in the northeast of England. Until recently, Anne had worked as a care assistant at Trees Park Residential Village near Teesside Airport. Despite leaving the job, Anne remained close with many of her ex-workmates. The shopping trip that morning was to purchase an 18th birthday present for a former colleague. Anne had been invited to the birthday party later that evening. After finishing her shopping, Anne returned to what was described as a luxury home, costing £300,000, in the small rural parish of Moreton Palms. Just to give some context, the house would be well over £1 million today. The large detached property was named Aeolian House and stood 70 metres from a lay-by on the A67 or A67 road between Darlington and Teesside Airport near Yarm. The house had extensive grounds and a long drive that ran 90 metres from the main road to the house. The nearest village was Middleton St George, which itself is a 15-minute drive east of Darlington. While the location was beautiful, it was also vulnerable and conspicuous. Anne was a little scared of the house and did not like spending time alone at the property.
The house, I don't know if you've seen the house, but the house is quite a substantial detached house in the middle of quite a bit of ground. We used to refer to it as the Amityville Horror House because that's exactly what it looked like. And that was, conversations with my mum about that. And she thought that it was haunted as well because she often used to mention things like that, people seeing things, etc.
Anne's husband Peter, aged 53, was a successful transport manager for local haulage firm Stillers. Peter's main office was only 10 minutes or so away, so he often came home to eat his lunch. That Friday, he got back to Aeolian House at 12:52 p.m. Anne did not eat with Peter, as she had already gotten herself a McDonald's when she was shopping in town. The couple both sat out in the garden as Peter ate his usual lunch of a sandwich and a cup of soup. Peter returned to work at 1:55 p.m. Before he left, Anne mentioned to him that she planned on taking advantage of the scorching weather by topping up on her tan. After a busy morning shopping and a party to look forward to that night, Anne was going to relax in the back garden and finish the book she was reading, The Ghost of Flight 401, a 1979 novel based on the true story of a plane crash investigation. After Peter left, Anne cleared away the lunch dishes. A short time later, at 2:30 p.m, a friend named Sheila called on the telephone to go over the travel arrangements for the party that evening. Anne had been trying to get in contact with Sheila over the last day or so. Originally, Anne had arranged to pick Sheila up and take her to the party, but she had since realised that there was not enough space in her car. As the pair chatted on the phone, alternative arrangements were made and the friends agreed to meet each other outside the club where the party was being held. Anne began sunbathing in the back garden. She was wearing just a bikini. Details of the bikini have never been released. At some point, Anne moved from the back garden to the front garden. She was forced to do this because a tractor that was cutting the grass in a neighbouring field was causing trimmings to blow over into the Heron's back garden. Anne went around to the front lawn. Anne's dog Heidi came along too. Heidi was an extremely loyal, rough collie. Think Lassie. who followed Anne everywhere and rarely left her side. At 3:30 p.m, a bus on its way to Darlington passed by Aeolian House, and a woman passenger named Margaret clearly witnessed Anne lying on her sun lounger in front of the house.
My mum was supposed to have been sitting at the front of her house sunbathing on that particular day. Not something that my mum would normally have done, but although the driveway was probably, 60 metres to the 60, 70 metres from the road to the house, the driveway. And my mum was supposed to have been sitting about 50 metres up that driveway at the side of the road, but that would have been in view of the road, which she wouldn't normally have done. And a blanket was there, grass was flattened, etc. So that again is a bit unusual. Heidi being there, clearly Heidi would have, I would have thought, put up a bit of a, maybe not a fight, but certainly made a lot of noise. The house is very, very isolated. I mean, the field next to it, I think, from memory, had a combine harvester working on it that particular day as well. So there'd have been a lot of noise from that, a lot of dust. Again, so the fact there was a lot of dust, that could be potentially why she was at the front of the house and she wouldn't normally be there, because she was just trying to get away from the dust from the combine harvester. So there's lots of conjecture. And hey, having been in the CID, I deal with facts. I don't deal with conjecture. It's ifs and buts.
That afternoon, Peter's adult daughters, Debbie and Jackie, who lived both locally, drove past Aeolian House. They were on their way home from a day out with their children at Whitley Bay. Debbie noticed Anne's sun lounger was outside and the front door to the property was open. At the time, she thought nothing of it. At 5:50 p.m, Peter Heron pulled into the driveway of Aeolian House in his white Mercedes. He parked up in front of the house and got out of the car. Very often, Anne would hear her husband's car coming up the long driveway and come out of the house to greet him. Today, she was nowhere to be seen. Peter noticed that the sun lounger was standing on the front lawn and a stubbed-out cigarette lay in an ashtray next to it. Nearby, a small radio played Radio Cleveland at a low volume. A book, bottle of suntan lotion, and a pair of slip-on shoes also lay nearby. A small area of grass around 22 metres from the house was flat, indicating someone had sat down on that spot. Heidi the collie was lying next to the open front door. It was very unusual for Heidi not to be with Anne, and for the door to be left like this. Peter entered the house. He turned left and went into the main living room. Anne was lying sprawled face down on the carpet, in a pool of blood. The body was just a few feet from the mantelpiece, which bore a photograph of Anne's son, Ralph. Anne's 5'3", 8-stone body was clad only in her bikini top. The bottom part had been removed. Peter went to the hallway and dialed 999. He then telephoned his boss, Paul Stiller, whom he was close to. Paul came over to the house straight away. Peter asked him if Paul would confirm what he had seen. Paul did so. The police and ambulance arrived soon after. Peter was outside the house when they arrived, and the officers would not let him back inside. When the police entered the property, they were struck by how quiet the house seemed. The only thing that could be heard was the ticking of the large grandfather clock, which stood towering in the hallway. A little later that evening, Anne's friend Sheila waited patiently outside the club in Darlington for Anne to turn up for the birthday party. After waiting an age, Sheila found a telephone. Remember, this was long before mobile phones was commonplace, and called Aeolian House. A man answered the phone, who Sheila did not recognise. She asked to speak to Anne, but the man explained that wasn't possible. When Sheila pushed the issue and threatened to come over to the house to find out what was going on, the man, who was a police officer, told her to stay where she was. He would send someone over to her. Sheila was then told in person that her close friend Anne had been killed, and it was a suspected murder.
But she must have been. Imagine the shock. You're waiting outside, you're there to celebrate, and you're just waiting for your friend, and you find out that. It must have been awful.
Yeah. Well, you don't get over that, do you? The shock of that.
No. But she was determined she was going to find out what was going on. She was, she wasn't going to just, be brushed off. So that was good.
Yeah.
Never knew who the man was.
Similarly, Anne's police officer's son, Ralph Cockburn, went into work that night to start his evening shift at a police station in Glasgow. His superior took him to one side to tell him the awful news. At first, Ralph assumed his mother must have been killed in an accident. He was in utter shock when he realised Anne had been a victim of foul play. A post-mortem determined that Anne's neck had been slashed 4 times. She had died from shock caused by blood loss. Time of death was estimated to have been between 3:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. 2 pieces of evidence bookend this window of time. Firstly, the bus passenger Margaret, who had seen Anne sunbathing at 3:30 p.m. Secondly, Anne always fed Heidi the dog at 5 p.m. As a fresh, empty dog food tin was not found in the rubbish bin, it was determined Anne had been killed before 5 p.m. Just as an aside, Heidi the collie was checked to see if any fibres had been transferred from the killer to her. I can't see that anything was found. Following Anne's death, Heidi became withdrawn and would sit quietly, trembling in the corner.
Her dog Heidi, she had a dog, and on the date that she was found, I think Heidi had disappeared for a couple of hours, but was eventually found, and Heidi, her dog, died short time after that as well. But Heidi was just by her side 24/7.
The murder weapon was thought to be a razor-sharp knife, something like a Stanley knife. The house, grounds and local farmland was searched, but the weapon was never found. Although Anne's bikini bottoms had been removed during the murder, Detective Superintendent Keith Reedman, who led the investigation, told the media within days that there was no evidence of a sexual assault, though as we will see, there seems to have been, at least in part, a sexual component to the motive. When investigators looked around the crime scene, they found that the rest of Aeolian House, both inside and outside, looked completely normal. There was no indication of a break-in. The doors, locks and windows looked untampered. Nothing was missing or disturbed, and there was no sign of a struggle, even in the living room where the body was found. The birthday present that Anne had bought that morning lay still wrapped and untouched in the living room. Robbery did not seem to have been the motive for the murder. The only thing of note was a small kink in the rug in front of the fireplace, and this could have been caused by the paramedics who attended the scene. Although Aeolian House was remote, the A67 was a well-used route. Police asked anyone who may have parked in the lay-by near the Heron's property between 2:30 and 5:50 p.m. on the afternoon of the murder to come forward. The spot was popular with lorry drivers and caravanners, so police were hopeful someone may have seen something. An early working theory was that the killer had parked there and seen Anne sunbathing. It was thought the killer had a history of prowling, but the crime was likely one of opportunity. Police set up checkpoints along the road to question drivers. On Monday, August 6th alone, over 600 vehicles were stopped and checked. Detective Superintendent Keith Reedman of Durham Police took charge of the investigation. During the first few days, things were incredibly busy as information flooded in. The day after the murder, a blood-stained sheet and 2 pieces of blood-soaked carpet were found in the garden of an empty house in Cowgate, Newcastle. This location is about a 50-minute drive north of Darlington. Forensic tests confirmed the blood was human, but I can find no more mention of this, so I presume it was dismissed as being connected to Anne's murder. Yarm Road Industrial Estate stood just 5 minutes' drive away from the Heron's property, and all employees of the factories were interviewed. It was thought that as the murder had happened on a Friday in the school summer holidays, some people may have been travelling on that day. These people may have left the area or even the country and be unaware of the significance of something they had witnessed. In a time before social media, every effort was made to get the word out there about the murder. Police went door to door and made an appeal on television through Crime Stoppers for information. Detective Chief Inspector Harvey Harris was pleased with the response from the public, but there was one person in particular they were hoping to get in touch with. They were trying to trace a woman who had tried to telephone the incident room at Darlington Police Station to relay information. She had inadvertently called the wrong number and ended up speaking to a Darlington resident. The woman had sounded distressed, and after being told she had dialed the wrong number, she abruptly hung up. She had not tried to make contact again. Despite this appeal, as far as I'm aware, the woman never called back and has never been identified.
I wonder what that was about. That's really odd. And why would you not call back? Unless it wasn't to do with Anne at all.
I guess we'll never know. Yeah, it's the fact she was upset as well.
Yeah. And you can always go to Crime Stoppers if you wanted to remain anonymous, but if you'd made that effort and it was something, then...
You think, yeah, I don't know, maybe fear, maybe...
And just to say it was me, it was nothing,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, they've never found nothing, never found out anything more about it. So 4 days after the murder, on August 7th, a very emotional Peter Heron held a press conference to plead with members of the public to come forward with information to help catch what he said was the maniac who had murdered his wife. He described Anne as a beautiful lass. In front of the TV cameras, he spoke of how he had first met Anne 10 years before and that it had been the best time of his life. By contrast, his life now was in ruins. He told how he had been deprived of a wonderful wife and her children of a doting, supportive mother. Peter was sure that the person who had killed his wife was out there, walking around, pretending nothing had happened. He believed this person was married and maybe even had children. He asked the wife or partner of the man to come forward, as he was sure they would know what he had done. Peter feared the man would strike again. He ended the news conference by talking about his belief that capital punishment should be brought back in murder cases such as this.
I was there for one of the press conferences, so Anne-Marie and I were there, and Anne-Marie made an appeal, and we were both sitting with, I think, Keith Redman was the SIO at that particular point. So yeah, we did do a press conference at that point. Can't remember if that was the same one that Peter Heron did.
So just less than a week after the conference, the news conference, there came some shocking news. Police confirmed in the press that they had discovered Peter had been having an affair with a 32-year-old local barmaid who I'll call Amelia. Amelia is not a real name, but this name was used in the 2022 Channel 5 documentary about the case. Amelia lived in the village of Middleton St George and worked part-time at the Dinsdale Golf Club, of which Peter Heron was a member. This is where the pair had first met. The affair had been going on since November 1989, but Amelia's 52-year-old husband, David, again not his real name, was completely unaware of it until it was revealed to him by detectives on Thursday, August 9th. The police themselves had been told about the affair by a member of the public believed to be an acquaintance of either Peter or Amelia. When police confronted Amelia about the relationship, she admitted to it straight away.
So he came up to Glasgow 2 or 3 days. So I can't remember the exact date that it was revealed in the press that he was having an affair with, I'm not going to name her, but the individual he was having an affair with. So it was between the date that my mum was killed and the date that it was revealed in the press. So we knew nothing when he came up to see us. And he came up with his daughter. His daughter and him came to my house in Luss, and my dad was there, I was there, my ex-wife was there, my sister was there, and he came in, and it was awkward. There was a strange feeling, and I felt something quite strange, so not what I expected to see him when he came up, and I can't remember how long he stayed, but he then left, and the first thing my ex-wife said to me was, "What did you think of that?" And I said, "I don't know, why, what did you think?" And she said, something not right. And that was it. And then I think it was maybe 2 or 3 days later it was announced in the press that he had been having this affair. So clearly my view on him changed at that point. Up to that point, it was feeling sorry for him. My view completely changed at that point. Not to say that it wasn't because I thought that he had killed my mum. It was purely because he had lied and he had been deceiving my mum and all the rest of it. And clearly that then potentially set up a motive, but there was there was no proof either way.
So Amelia had been with her husband for about 11 years, but had been married for only 2. So when David, her husband, found out about the affair, he kicked Amelia out of the family house. The whole incident, the whole matter of this affair played out on the front pages of national newspapers, and they did use the actual names of everyone concerned as well. So it must have been incredibly stressful for both David and Amelia. One of David's adult children voiced the family's anger and resentment towards Peter Heron, particularly in light of the press conference he had given less than a week before. So news of the affair thrust David into the firing line of the police. It could be construed that he had a motive for murdering Anne in order to get back at Peter. However, David had a strong alibi, and it was clear he did not know about the affair until after the murder. The police themselves have since said that at no point was David considered a suspect. 8 months later, David gave an interview with the Sunday Sun talking about how the whole experience had wrecked his life. He and Amelia had divorced, but the former couple was still living in the same house. At the time of the murder, David very much felt that he was being viewed as a suspect after he had undergone 23 grueling hours of questioning. The trauma of this had left David needing psychiatric treatment. He had very strong words for Peter Heron and blamed him for the hell he had been through. In the Channel 5 documentary, broadcast in 2022, Peter refers to his relationship with Amelia as a fling rather than an affair, stating they had only been intimate on 2 occasions, once in London and once in York. Obviously, Anne's own private life was looked into, but police found no evidence that she was having an affair or any clandestine relationships. This public revealing of his extramarital relationship did not prevent Peter from continuing to speak with the media. He gave an interview with the Sunday Sun in which he stated the man who had killed Anne must hate women, and when police caught him, he wanted just 5 minutes alone with the man. Peter put up a £500 reward for information leading to the arrest and prosecution of Anne's killer. All the groundwork investigators were putting in was paying off as various pieces of information came into them concerning the afternoon of Friday, August 3rd. There were many vehicles seen in the vicinity of Aeolian House that police were attempting to trace. A Ford Sierra or Austin Montego was seen parked on a road near the house at 3:10, and a short time later near the Heron's driveway. In later reports, it is said to have been a Sierra. It had a distinctive CB-style aerial on the roof. A blue Mazda 626 was spotted in a lane around a mile from the Heron's home. A man was driving the car and a fair-haired woman was in the passenger seat. A blue car, possibly a Vauxhall Astra, was seen parked outside Aeolian House at the end of the drive at 4:45 p.m. Another car being looked for was a silver Mercedes-type car, which was seen on the road around the time of the murder, with its headlights flashing. A week after the murder, police mentioned a car that was seen leaving the driveway of Aeolian House at 5:05. The car was blue and was thought to have been a Japanese make and around 5 years old. The witness to this event was a taxi driver who happened to be passing Aeolian House at this time. He saw the car race down the driveway and for a second thought it wasn't going to stop and would crash into him. In the end, the blue car came out just behind the taxi, narrowly missing it. The blue car then accelerated at speed and overtook the taxi.
That reconstruction on Crime Watch, I saw that. It was so fast, he came bombing it down the drive, the blue car, didn't it?
Yeah, that's why I saw it from the... it's hard to tell, like 50 miles an hour he seemed to be going.
Yeah, really just flew himself out onto the road, and you could see from the taxi's perspective as well that he just whizzed out at the back of him and then overtook him.
Yeah, just shot off then down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to have been the best lead, this blue car coming down the drive at about the time.
In a sense, this is where it revolves around a lot of this case, and we'll come back to it again and again, the blue car and who was driving it. So the witness who saw the car was driven to car parks in the area to see if they could identify the make and model of the car. So the car was later said to have possibly been a Vauxhall Cavalier or Astra, but Mazda and Toyota are also suggested as possibilities. The Sunday Sun reported in 1995 that 2 men towing a vehicle also noticed this car travelling at speed down the driveway onto the main road. They did not remember the number plate. So this speeding blue car is believed to be the same blue car, described as possibly a Vauxhall Astra, seen parked right outside Aeolian House at 4:45 p.m. So a couple of witnesses got a look at the man driving the blue car. He was said to be aged between 30 and 45, although sometimes this is narrowed to 35 to 45. He had dark hair and a suntan complexion. It was speculated this might mean he had a job working outside. Of course, it might be that he just returned from holiday. Some reports say the man's dark complexion may have even been the result of dirt or grime. They said he looked unwashed. So as we shall see, this person remains a key point of interest in the investigation. He has never been identified. A photo fit has never been produced, as police argued that they didn't have enough details to do so. And I definitely read somewhere that there were some discrepancies amongst witness descriptions of the man.
Yeah, I was disappointed because when I first saw it on Crime Watch, before I really looked into the case, this was this suntanned man in the blue car. And I thought, oh, that's great description.
Agreed, yeah.
But then you dig into it a little bit and you realise there was discrepancies. Other people said something different. And
Yeah. So I understand why they didn't, because I think it was just so generic. They just thought it's not going to help. They just get flooded with leads that are going to take them nowhere, basically. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, lastly, there's another vehicle as well that was seen. So, a blue British Leyland Sherpa type van, so like a Ford Transit van, with a Trident logo on the side panel, was seen parked at the bottom of the driveway between 5 and 6 p.m. This vehicle was said to contain 3 men. Some reports note that the van was scruffy. The description of the Trident logo was quite vague, and witnesses could not be any more specific. So a massive effort was put into finding all these vehicles, and in the first week, 1,000 cars were stopped along the A67, but with no luck.
That Trident logo, that was quite prominent for a while as well, wasn't it?
It was, and I think it was only one witness who said about the logo.
Right.
They only said it was Trident-like, so obviously I'm guessing they were travelling past in a vehicle too quick. So yeah, so it was quite vague.
Man, again, it would be good. You must have known if you were in that van, if 3 people seen in the van. You can back each other up. Surely it's safe to come forward. I know people are scared to come forward in case they get, implicated, but you've got backups there, surely.
You've got 3 people, yeah.
Yeah, come forward and say.
I mean, obviously, maybe they had something to do with it, but if they didn't, they might have just fearful of getting finger pointed, or they could have been, who knows, they could have been up to no good anyway. Stolen goods in their car. You don't know, do you? Maybe they were...
Oh, you're so suspicious, aren't you?
Maybe they were casing the joint. You don't know, do you? I mean, but there's obviously a reason why they didn't come forward. And for all 3 of them not to, it wasn't just one person. So that's a little conspiracy then. Yeah, you got 3 people who are not willing to come forward. So anyway, this is another quite a big point. So a week after the murder, police announced they were trying to track down a person who was seen jogging near the Heron's home on that afternoon. The man was wearing a blue singlet and black jogging bottoms with an elasticated waist. So this seemed unusual to police, as the temperatures, as I already said, it was 34 degrees on 93 Fahrenheit. So it was the hottest day of the year. So 3 weeks later, after they first announced they were looking for this man, he'd still not been identified. So the police made another plea for him to come forward so they could eliminate him as a suspect. They believed the man might be able to shed light on the blue car seen leaving the driveway at 5:05. So police organised a reconstruction of this person running past the house to help stir up memories. So the jogger had been seen by 2 witnesses. At 3:10, he was seen at the top of the Heron's driveway. And then 2 hours later, a passenger in a taxi noticed a man jogging about 3/4 of the way along a footpath which ran in front of the Heron's property. So a 2-hour jog on the hottest day of the year is pretty hardcore.
And he wasn't getting very far by the sounds of it either. He's not got far along the road.
Obviously going back and forth, going in a circle possibly.
Yeah.
So he was heading in the direction of Middleton St. George, the little village. And the other thing they noted, the man was running at quite a speed, so faster than the average jogging speed. So the first witness was able to provide the description of the jogger's clothing, which I've already just given, and said he had a medium build. The second witness offered a bit more detail. So they said he was under 30, 6 foot tall, with medium build and dark wavy hair, which was cut short at the nape of the neck. So I'm guessing he may have been sporting a wedge haircut, which was very popular in the summer of 1990. I remember because I had one. So it was when you have it cut very short and then kind of have curtains on top, which with the wavy hair. So I'm guessing something like that. That's what I'm guessing anyway.
Yeah, that made me laugh. The wedge haircut.
The wedge haircut, yeah.
Well, again, there's another one. There's somebody else that if he wasn't up to no good and was just either running fast or running quite slow, why not come forward and just say, yeah, it was me. I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, I did notice they didn't mention the jogger from what I remember in the documentary, the Channel 5 documentary. They didn't mention the jogger.
Right. So maybe he did.
But they haven't said, that police have never said, I can't find anything to say that he came forward. All the newspapers say he never came forward. So It may be just that they discounted it. I don't know. Or they're holding that back. I don't know. Anne's funeral took place towards the end of November 1990. So 100 people were in attendance at the service at St. Teresa's Roman Catholic Church in Darlington. A detective was asked by a journalist if the killer may have been present at the funeral, and he answered that it was possible. So this was perhaps a hint that police believed the killer knew Anne. As Anne's husband and the person to find the body, Peter understood he would be top of the list of potential suspects. This was even before the news broke of his affair. It was to be expected that investigators would be looking hard into Peter's movements on the afternoon in question. Peter provided the following alibi. After lunch, Peter left Aeolian House and returned to his nearby office. He was working at his desk until he received a phone call from a firm called Cleveland Bridge. They requested that Peter come over to the offices to talk over a contract Peter's company were tendering for. Shortly after the phone call, Peter left for Cleveland Bridge. By 3:15 p.m, he had arrived and was engaging in discussion with his client and their colleagues. He left Cleveland Bridge at 4:30 p.m. As a note here, in a letter written by Peter to Mike Barton, Chief Constable of Durham Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, published in the Northern Echo, August 6, 2015, he says he was in front of Cleveland Bridge employees at around 3:15 p.m. In the Channel 5 documentary on the case, broadcast in 2022, Peter's daughter Debbie says the meeting started at 3:45 p.m, and Peter implies he arrived at this time. In 1990, employees of Cleveland Bridge were able to back up Peter's story. After the meeting, rather than going the straightforward way back to the office, which would have taken him right past Aeolian House, Peter decided to take a longer circular route through the village of Croft. He got back to his office at 5 p.m. Peter then left for home almost an hour later, arriving shortly before 6 p.m, which is when he found Anne's body. According to a 2021 podcast produced by Crime Plus Investigation, the reason for the extended journey was because Peter went to visit the woman he was having an affair with. There was one witness, a former employee of Peter's, who claimed they had seen Peter driving his white Mercedes at 3:15 p.m. The Mercedes was said to be driven erratically, with the headlights flashing. If you remember, I mentioned that one of the cars the police were wishing to trace was a Mercedes seen driving with its headlights flashing, although in that report the car was said to have been silver. Peter denied this was him, pointed to the fact that 3 employees of Cleveland Bridge made official statements to police saying he was with them at this time. Another report had Peter seen by 3 witnesses at a roundabout about 2 miles from Aeolian House, travelling in its direction. This was at 3:50 to 3:55 p.m. The issue was that all 3 witnesses provided a different description of the car. Regardless, Peter maintained he was in a meeting at Cleveland Bridge at this time. Police did not pursue the matter with Peter. One of the main reasons for this was that no blood was found anywhere on Peter's clothing or his car interior. It was proved by witnesses that he had worn the same clothing all day. Despite this, the police continued to keep a close eye on Peter.
So he said initially in the letter that was sent to the Crown Prosecution Service that he was in front of Cleveland Bridge employees at around 3:15. But then in the documentary, Peter's daughter says that the meeting started at 3:45. And Peter said he arrived at this time. So how could he be in front of the employees at 3:15 if he only arrived at 3:45? Or are they just getting the times mixed up a wee bit, do you think?
It could be that they're getting the times mixed up.
Yeah.
Because it might be that he arrived at 3:15, but was just chatting basically, and the official meeting, because he does say that in the documentary that the meeting started at 10 to 4, I think. It's really hard to comment on that, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It's hard because you've just got two different things, and it might be, there could be a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah, when you read that, I was like, doesn't quite add up. I mean, he was obviously with 3 different employees. He was there.
I did go back and read, because I wanted to get this right. So that's why I've actually put the sources in the text there as well, to make it clear for me. So, yeah, it's really hard to know why there's a discrepancy in those two things.
Yeah. I mean, it's half an hour. I couldn't accurately tell you a time either, from such a long time ago. It's probably just that.
And obviously, Anne was seen alive at 3:30 p.m. as well.
And that's right, yes. So that really doesn't matter then, doesn't it?
No, it is a confusing thing. And that's what I've just thought I'll add it, because that's in the sources, and that's out there in the research.
But yeah, you're right.
In terms of the investigation, things had hit a brick wall. 12 months in, 5,000 people had been interviewed and 3,850 statements had been taken. 2,700 vehicles had been checked, with 1,200 forensic samples and 387 sets of fingerprints taken. Altogether, 5,000 separate lines of inquiry were investigated. For example, in April 1991, 3 local Darlington men were questioned in connection with Anne's murder. They were held at different police stations in Darlington, Newton Aycliffe, and Bishop Auckland. They were all released without charge a day later. Police had come up empty-handed in their efforts to trace the scruffy blue van with a Trident logo and the suntan man seen driving the blue car. As we've hinted at already, to this day, they've not been tracked down. So October 1991 witnessed the inquest into Anne's death, overseen by coroner Colin Penner. DS Keith Reedman told the inquest the major issue was deciphering a motive. Had Anne been killed by someone she knew, or by an opportunist sex killer who had just happened to see Anne sunbathing in her front garden? Had the person arrived intending to burgle the house or rape Anne? Or had the tragic event started with an innocent encounter that had suddenly turned violent? These were the questions that the investigators had no definitive answers for. A verdict of unlawful killing was given by the coroner. Without a clear motive, it was assumed that there was a sexual element to the crime. The investigation carried on, but by now the number of detectives working the case had been massively reduced, though there was still a small team diligently trying everything they could to find Anne's killer. On the 2-year anniversary of Anne's murder, Detective Superintendent Keith Reedman vowed he would never give up. He was pretty convinced the killer was the dark-haired man who drove away in the blue car. He believed the killer likely knew Anne and lived locally. In 1990, criminal profiling was just beginning to take off, and Professor Cantor of the University of Sussex was brought in to aid the investigation. He had recently helped police in the south of England catch serial rapist and killer John Duffy. Unfortunately, this did not lead to a breakthrough in the case. By the summer of 1993, 100,000 police staff hours had been spent on the investigation, but they were no closer to catching the killer. 1993 also witnessed Peter getting remarried to a woman named Frida from Motherwell in Scotland. They had been in a relationship for a couple of years. Durham police sent at least 2 uniformed police officers to attend the wedding service. Were they sending him a message that they were still watching him? Peter had his own thoughts on who the killer was. In the Daily Record on July 20th, 1992, he is quoted as saying he believed the police knew who the killer was, but couldn't prove it. The following year brought a very disturbing development in the investigation. A new probe was launched into the murder after a series of mocking and spiteful letters were received by the police, the press, and family members, said to be from Anne's killer. All the letters had local postmarks. In total, 4 letters were sent over an 8-day period in the first half of 1994. though the news of them didn't break until October of that year. The letter to the Northern Echo newspaper in Darlington began, quote, "Hello, editor. It's me, Anne Heron's killer." The letters contained what The Guardian called, on October 6, 1994, quote, "vivid and authentic detail." A criminal psychologist and a forensic psychiatrist were asked to study them. The author of the letter stated that he enjoyed killing Anne, and that in general he found pleasure in hurting people physically and mentally. In this way, these letters read like some of those sent by the infamous Zodiac killer to the San Francisco press. The author went on to say they did not owe an apology for what they had done. The writer also referred to serial killer Fred West, whose evil crimes had recently come to light. They mocked West for getting caught. A handwriting expert compared the letters to samples of people connected to the case, including Peter Heron. I have not found the results of this analysis, but there does not seem to have been a match with anyone known by police. The author of the letters remains unidentified. Following the letters, Anne's daughter, Anne-Marie, made a public appeal on a Tyne Tees Crime Stoppers special for people to come forward with information about her mother's murder. Anne-Marie said she believed the letters were from the killer. Anne's mother, Margaret, also publicly asked the killer to give himself up to police. Perhaps not unsurprisingly, this did not happen. Not long after this, Superintendent Keith Reedman retired. He had been in charge of the investigation since the beginning, and much to his own disappointment, he had not been able to solve the case. At the time, the case was one of just 2 unsolved murders in County Durham, the other being from the 1950s. Detective Chief Inspector John Blake was now put in charge of the investigation. The year 2000 saw Peter Heron retire and move to Scotland. Sadly, his wife Frida passed away from cancer in July 2005. Since the mid-1990s, the Heron family had very little contact with the police. This all changed on November 9, 2005.
And that was part 1 of our Away episode, all about the murder of 44-year-old Anne Heron, told by John Dobson from the fantastic Unknown Persons podcast. You can listen to part 2 of this story now by visiting Unknown Persons podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.